From the latest on Caribbean cruises to kosher safaris, pilgrimages to Jewish Eastern Europe, and award-winning wines and international cuisine in sun-drenched Tel Aviv. Sit back and enjoy the trip with the travel edition of the Jerusalem Post podcast.
Well, since I say hello first.
Hi.
You're looking a little hairy.
Getting my beard ready, as you are, for our next adventure.
We've decided to grow beards because we looked at the temperature where we're going next weekend, and the daytime high is -9.
That's in Celsius. What is it in Fahrenheit, oh clever one?
I think it's about 14.
And that's daytime high.
Yes, and the evenings are going to be minus Fahrenheit. I think about -6.
Good Lord. Okay, it was going to be -19.
Have you ever been skiing?
I went dry slope skiing many years ago, which is a thing. It's this sort of material which is like a crisscross of toothbrush. And when you land on it, because you're not wearing gloves because you're not in freezing conditions, you burn your hands like a carpet burn. So that's the only skiing I've ever done. And it hurt.
I can't walk in a straight line, so put me at an angle and put me on 2 sticks. There is no chance I will come out with my limbs intact.
So this mystery location that we're not going to actually reveal till we've been there, also, hopefully, because COVID isn't going to intervene and jinx this. But are we going to be skiing?
I don't think we are. I've seen they've got ski lifts there.
It's one of the world's longest ski slopes. And it's not somewhere that you would expect. But we are going out onto a frozen lake where we will be...
I don't want to reveal.
Mark and I are very excited because it's got to be, at least 2 months since our last trip. And the trouble with travelling for, I would love to say for a living, but in our case, travelling for a hobby, is once you get a taste of it, you just want more. And on that note, Mark, where are we headed in today's podcast?
Well, we're going to start in Africa, but North Africa. I don't think we've been there yet, have we?
To North Africa, no.
Going to a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Yep, we're going to be heading to Djerba and then the Windy City, which brings us on to our quiz questions.
Question number 1. Star Wars was mainly filmed in Tunisia, but whose home was filmed on the island of Djerba?
That's a great question. And for those of you who don't know where the Windy City is, question number 2. Chicago is known as the Windy City. But what is the coldest wind chill factor on record in the Windy City? The answers at the end of the pod. You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast travel edition. And Mark, who is definitely inebriated, has something of the giggles. We're not in the same room. He's in his house and I'm in mine. But I'm looking at him over our video connection and he is killing himself laughing.
Yeah, sorry, I misheard what you said. I thought the first article was about gerbils, but it's about Djerba. So let's be serious and talk about Djerba. Djerba is a very interesting island off the coast of Tunisia, where I happened to go for my honeymoon. Where did you go for your honeymoon, David?
Well, we kind of honeymooned a lot later than our wedding, but we ended up, thanks to my brother-in-law's very generous gift, we ended up in Le Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City, which is a wonderful, wonderful hotel.
Oh, sounds lovely. Anyway, Djerba in Tunisia.
Djerba has actually always fascinated me from the first time that I heard about it, mainly because of the Jewish community, which has been there. Well, I don't even know if there's a record as to how old the community is there.
So whenever I tell people that I went to Tunisia on my honeymoon, the first thing they ask is, did you go to Djerba? And unfortunately we didn't, but I'd love to find out more about it. So I found an expert author, Annika Hernroth-Rothstein, who's firstly going to tell us about herself and then Djerba.
I'm Swedish. I'm currently living in Ghana after many different trips and stays around the world. I am a political consultant, author, and journalist.
You're Swedish, you live in Ghana, so we've got you here to talk about Djerba in Tunisia.
Makes all the sense.
You should definitely write a book about this sort of thing.
Oh, should I now? Well, as it happens, etc. Plug. I have.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that book?
It's called Exiles, Portraits of the Jewish Diaspora, and it's exactly that. It's portraits of 12 countries around the more colorful areas I spent 2 years traveling around the world, hanging out with Jews, talking to them, and learning about our fantastic Jewish world. It's their stories.
The first chapter of the book is Djerba, and Djerba is in Tunisia, where I went on my honeymoon. I didn't go to Djerba, but I went to Tunisia. How do listeners get to Djerba?
Most Israelis cannot actually go to Tunisia, but they can go to Djerba. So there is an exemption there. So you can get to Djerba. I got there via Paris. I think that's the easiest way. You fly there, fully functioning airport. It's a little island off the coast of Tunisia. It's easy enough. I think it's like 2 or 3 flights a week or something like that, at least from Paris.
Tell us a couple of interesting stories about your time within the Djerba community.
The first thing I did was I got a hotel and I walked across the street and I saw a jeweler and I thought, why not go in and chat a little bit? And it says Shimon on the top of the store. So I said, I feel like I might be lucky here. And I think 20 minutes after that, I was invited to his and his extended family's house for Shabbos. And I ended up moving in with them because that's how it goes. It's an extremely traditional community. You know, I describe it as the shtetl, and I do that in the most positive sense of the word in the book because they are closed off from the rest of the world, but then they enter into sort of the coexistence to work, and then they go back into the shtetl at night. So it's a very traditional, very old school community. And the girls and boys live on different floors in the house. So the siblings, like the boys live upstairs and the girls live downstairs. So I just moved in with one of the families there, and it helped me really immerse myself in the experience. I went there during Hanukkah. I was actually also writing a story on that for J-Post, the Hanukkah experience there. And it was magical because a big part of being there is that you feel like you're being transported back in time because it's not your everyday touristy place. It feels like 1,001 nights in a way because you have those old winding streets and a lot of market people. There's plenty of kosher food.
You're actually answering all of our questions in one go, which is fantastic.
That's how I roll, yeah. Swedish efficiency.
So if I was there as a tourist, could I take a walking tour? Is the synagogue open for tourists to see?
Yes and no. Like walking tour, it's not like going to Hungary or something like that, where it's a historical, mostly historical community and you do the traditional tours. My recommendation would be if you go there and you're a Jew, first of all, go to shul. You can go to the synagogue. The synagogues are open. That one of the fascinating things is in this island, and I say this, it's 2 streets. The main city is 2 streets. And during prayer time for both Muslims and Jews, everybody closes up shop and just goes to pray. There are no Chiloni people in Djerba.
No secular people.
No secular people on the island. So it means that when it's time to pray, it's time to pray. So then you can kind of follow the herd. It's a little bit more difficult. I mean, we've found a way around it. If you're a woman, you can't just walk in. It's not necessarily always a natural place for women to be in every single synagogue, but it's the smartest thing to do is just immerse yourself. And there's your walking tour. To get back to what you asked for stories, what I learned was how incredibly traditional it is. I felt like I was able to peek, at a world that I would probably never see again. And also that the influence of Arab culture is very strong. So you see an incredibly Orthodox community that has a lot of Arab culture in it. After shul and before Shabbos dinner, all the girls kind of go walking up and down the street on the main street in the Jewish part, in the shtetl, and all the men stand by the side up against the wall. And we don't look each other in the eye, but it's clearly, everybody's wearing their Shabbos best. All the ladies are looking amazing. And this is a chance for unmarried women to kind of, show themselves. The most surprising thing of all was I was walking next to one of the sisters who I didn't know was newly engaged. And she kind of nudges me a little bit and says, "Oh, don't look now, but there to the right is my fiance." I said, "Oh, should we go over and say hi?" And she says, No. After we were engaged, we don't speak until the chuppah. And I said, "You live in this tiny little 1/4 city." And I said, how does that even work and why? And she says, "Well, one glance and then you have a pregnant bride under the chuppah. So we don't want to risk anything. So it was the extreme version of it could lead to mixed dancing, you know. So it was fascinating.
I hope the engagements aren't too long. That could be quite...
So it was amazing, yeah.
Beyond the Jewish community, are there other things for a visitor, Jewish or non-Jewish, to see?
Well, yes, if you are like me, which I would say is a kind of typical female tourist anywhere, if you like buying beautiful things, you know, Djerba is your place. I think I had, $3,000 on me for everything, for the trip and everything. I couldn't spend it. It's still cheap. It's one of the few places in the world where you can stay for a long time and it's still really cheap. The pottery, you know, various artisan handicrafts, it's some of the most amazing, beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. Leatherwork, of course, jewelry. I have more jewelry than I dare say after this. But it's a beautiful island. I mean, it's also known as a beautiful tourist island for Tunisians as well because of the beaches, because it's relatively untouched still. So yes, it's simple. You know, it's a simple existence, and they have luxury hotels. But if you want to live in the city, you know, you live in a kind of traditional Tunisian way. I found that to be wonderful because it's very rare today that you don't get a perfectly curated traditional experience where it's clear that they've, you know, curated it for tourists. But this is the actual way that people live. And so it's worth the trip no matter what. Even if you don't want to go to shul for some reason, it's definitely worth the trip because it's an experience of a lifetime.
What about kosher and veggie food?
Okay, so that's my half answer from before. So they have, I think I gained probably 6 pounds in a week. I mean, I'm pretty sure I did because I've never eaten, it's some of the best kosher food I've ever had in my life. Because of course it's Tunisian, so it's incredibly tasty. And they have, you know, a lot of traditional like brick. They have, you know, fried dough with egg inside of it, kind of like, you know, the Georgian dish. It's spicy, it's amazing. And it's a great place to meet the Jews because it's a small community. I think that there were 2 kosher places in the city when I was there a few years ago. And it's a great place to meet other Jews because as in any small community, even in mine, those are the places where you hang out and just chill or have a Coke Zero or just, you know, talk to the parliament outside. It's no different than any other Jewish place in that way, but it's really amazing.
I love Tunisia. When I went, I really would love to go to Djerba as well.
And as for, you know, guides, what will happen very quickly, and it happened, and I don't think I'm extraordinary in any way as a tourist, what happens if you just speak to the Jews there, they will be happy to guide you. You know, they'll be happy to answer any questions. It helps, of course, if you speak Hebrew, French, or Arabic, because English is not that commonly spoken. I was very lucky. I met somebody who just got back from yeshiva. You know, he had been abroad a bit. So it was, you know, he helped me out when my French faltered. But, you know, they will give you the tour, and that's a much better tour, that they will show you around, for sure, be invited to their house. You know, I was invited to cook with one of the mothers and learn new dishes. And, you know, that's the experience we all want, the real life of people at the places we visit.
What other fascinating places have you got in your book?
I spent 2 months in Iran, living there as a Jew. I spent significant time, a year almost, in Venezuela. Siberia, I had always wanted to go to, so I went to Irkutsk. Uzbekistan, you know, I spent Pesach in Marrakesh. I've been all over the place. And of course, places that are exotic to other people and not as much to me. I told the story of my own community through the stories of my best friend, a 95-year-old old macher from my community, which was a great honor for me to be able to tell the story of his life. Spent a lot of time in Finland. I've tried to tell many a story about the Jewish world, and I've chosen communities that are not spoken about enough. There were a lot of countries that I couldn't cover in the book because it would have been too big a book. So I'm hoping that there will be a second one when I keep at it, you know.
Starting with Ghana.
starting with Ghana. So there's a lot more to see.
The book is Exile. The author is Annika Hernroth-Rothstein. You can get the book on Amazon and any other place where you can buy jolly good reads. Annika, thank you so much indeed for your time on our podcast.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Djerba Fact File. The island is served by Djerba Zarzis International Airport. Tunisair flies direct from Tunis, Paris, Frankfurt, and a number of French regional airports. There are also direct flights from Luxembourg and Brussels, as well as seasonal flights from Moscow, Zurich, Amsterdam, and Berlin. The easiest way to access the island from mainland Tunisia is by ferry. The currency is the Tunisian dinar. $1 will buy you 2.88 dinar. Djerba has a very mild Mediterranean climate. The best months to visit are July through September, with a perfect temperature around 28 degrees Celsius, 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and scarce rainfall. There are a number of 5-star hotels on Djerba, including the Radisson Blu, Hasdrubal Prestige, and Palm Beach Palace. Nearly all the Tunisian Djerban Jewish food scene is concentrated on the main street in Hara Kabira. Local specialities include chicken and spicy beef grills and skewers, fiery meatball kofta, and brick, triangular thin pastries filled with egg, tuna, capers, and potatoes.
And now it's time for the latest news brought to you by the Jerusalem Post podcast, Travel Edition. Global tourism experienced a 4% upturn in 2021 compared to the previous year. That's according to preliminary estimates by the World Tourism Organization.
Philippine Airlines will start twice weekly direct flights from Manila to Tel Aviv from April 2022. Flight times are expected to be around 11.5 hours.
A United Airlines flight from Newark to Tel Aviv was recently turned back as 2 passengers bumped themselves up from economy to business class and became increasingly aggressive when asked to return. United Airlines says it doesn't tolerate inappropriate behaviour and passenger safety is valued above all.
Wizz Air will launch a second daily Tel Aviv to London route in March 2022, this time to Gatwick Airport, one of 14 new routes from the South London Airport.
And to Brazil now, where the Rosewood Sao Paulo Hotel just opened with dining managed by executive chef Felipe Rodrigues, who held a Michelin star until 2020. The hotel will feature 6 restaurants and a 24-hour kosher kitchen.
Bulls, Bears, Black Hawks, White Sox.
You're listening to Wildlife on the BBC with Mark Gordon.
Well, after gerbils, I thought we'd go with
Chicago. So we are headed stateside, as we said right at the start, to the Windy City, to Chicago, home of some amazing jazz. It's also the home of Dr. Ed Mazur from the leadership of the Chicago Jewish Historical Society.
The Jewish community of Chicago, its roots really stretch back to the 1830s and early 1840s. The first synagogue in Chicago was established in the mid-1840s, and it was called Kehilath Anshe Mariv, the Congregation of the Men of the West. And in the 1840s, where Chicago is, right now we're in the center of the United States, that was pretty much, could be considered the West in some quarters. It was established by Jews who came from various parts of Germany. Now, that first Jewish community was located right in the center of downtown or central business district Chicago at Lake and Wells Street, and the synagogue was located above the dry goods store of 2 Jewish merchants. Within a few years, there were differences of opinion within the congregation about religious practices, if wearing a straw hat was acceptable in an Orthodox setting, as opposed to a more formal black hat, for example. Kehilath Anshe Mariv soon morphed into several other congregations. Probably the most prominent would be Chicago's Sinai congregation, which is a Reformed congregation located in the Gold Coast area of Chicago. This group that numbered maybe 25, 30,000 over the next 40 years will be overwhelmed by Jews from Central and Eastern Europe. Divisions between the two communities were so defined that we had two charitable organizations for many years, one catering to East Europeans and one catering to others. Eventually in the 1920s, largely under the leadership of the late Julius Rosenwald, the man responsible for putting the Sears Roebuck Corporation onto everybody's mind and the kitchen table with the catalogs and so on, these formed one and were united. Today, there are about 330,000 Jews who live inside the city of Chicago.
Would it be easy if I was visiting Chicago today to see some of these old Jewish sites? What is still around from the mid-19th century?
I would recommend that when you come to Chicago, that you make it your business to go to the Chicago Loop Synagogue, right in downtown Chicago. It has magnificent stained glass windows. I would ask you to go to the Kehilat Anshe Mariv Isaiah Israel congregation in Hyde Park. It's an architectural treasure designed in a kind of Moorish style of architecture. Then I would ask you to go up to the suburbs of Chicago, north suburb called Glencoe, Illinois, and visit the North Shore congregation designed by a very famous architect, Minoru Yamasaki. I would ask you to visit the North Lawndale community, Roosevelt Road, Independence Boulevard. And there you would find a number of currently black churches that were very imposing Jewish synagogues. One that I call the Romanian Synagogue of Chicago, KINS Synagogue of Chicago. These are all black churches today. And I would recommend that you go into those areas with a guide. Like any other inner city area, they're perfectly safe for the most part, but you have to be aware of your surroundings. I would then recommend that you visit the Wicker Park or Bucktown area in Chicago, the University of Chicago in Hyde Park, which has a tremendous number of important Jewish people associated with that, including the site of the first atomic reaction, Enrico Fermi, but his wife Laura Fermi was an Italian Jewess. West Rogers Park, you should walk Devon Avenue from Western to Kedzie Avenue. And then along California between Devon and Touhy Avenues, it's about a half-mile walk. We call that the Rue de Pays because there are a number of Jewish synagogues and other institutions in that vicinity. We also have several cemeteries that have important meaning to Chicago Jewry. The Waldheim Cemetery, the Oakwood Cemetery, the Graceland Cemetery, our Millennium Park in Chicago, where you would find the Pritzker Music Pavilion. Pritzker family, they own the Hyatt Hotel chain. The current governor of Illinois is Governor Pritzker. His sister Penelope was Secretary of the Treasury for President Obama. You would find the Bean or Cloud Gate, designed by Anish Kapoor, whose family is of Jewish heritage, and the Crown Fountains, all in our Millennium Park. The Henry Crown family, one of the major figures in General Dynamics. At one time, they owned the Empire State Building. So there's an awful lot to do in Chicago.
David and I love to go eating and cooking our way around the world. Are there some good traditional Jewish-style restaurants to visit in Chicago while we're visiting all these other sites?
Yes, you'd have to come to my house and my wife would have to cook you up a very traditional meal. For people who are observant, in downtown Chicago, central area, we don't have a viable kosher restaurant. But when you get out to neighborhoods like West Rogers Park, Skokie, and other areas in the north suburbs, there are some very, very good restaurants. There's one called Shallots, which I highly recommend. There is a restaurant called Evita's Argentinian Steakhouse, about 6300 North on Lincoln Avenue, which is very popular. We have two restaurants in our Newtown area, popular with Jewish people, called Milt's for the Perplexed. There's the Bagel Restaurant. We have a number of dairy restaurants in Chicago. There are a number of other restaurants, a number of pizza restaurants. We have several grills that serve Middle Eastern food, and there's an excellent sushi restaurant called Hamachi in West Rogers Park. So we have quite a few places. You won't starve in Chicago as long as you two gentlemen have a credit card. Believe me, you're in good shape. You're in good shape.
How can anybody listening to this find out more about the Chicago Jewish Historical Society?
Well, we have a website, chicagojewishhistory.org. They could email me, emazur531 at AOL.com. I'd be glad to respond.
Dr. Ed Mazur, thank you for sharing. We only heard a tip of a very, very large iceberg of information. Thank you for your time, and also for the two of us who have been watching you throughout this interview. Thank you for having a wonderful collection of locomotives and other trains in the background while we've been talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I even have 2 Hornbys, so you fellas from the UK should be familiar with that.
Thank you.
Chicago Fact File. Chicago has 2 large airports, O'Hare International and Midway International. O'Hare is one of the busiest airports in the United States. Most North American airlines and the major European and Asian airlines offer direct flights to O'Hare. Southwest Airlines is the main carrier at Midway. Taxis from both airports to the city can be quite expensive. $30 from Midway and $40 from O'Hare. A train ride from O'Hare into town is $5. If you're driving in Chicago, be aware that some of the expressways around the city are referred to by their name rather than their number, so locals will call the I-55 the Stevenson Expressway. Given Chicago's nickname is the Windy City, it gives you an idea about the climate, at least some of the year. December to March is very cold. July and August can be hot and humid. May and September are often the most comfortable times of year to visit. As you can imagine, the city offers pretty much every style of accommodation. Reader's Digest suggests the best place to stay in town is the Gwen, a member of the Marriott Luxury Collection. It's a great city for international cuisine. There's a Greek town, Desi Corridor, Chinatown, and soul food and barbecue in Chatham's. There's an abundance of celebrity chefs in Lincoln Park and Wicker Park. There are around 20 kosher restaurants in the city's suburbs, to say nothing of bakeries, delis, and more.
Firstly, I would like to thank Annika and Ed for appearing on the podcast today and keeping us entertained for the last 30 minutes.
And we at this time implore you and beg you and ask.
Are you on bended knee again?
No, I'm not on bended knee this time, but I'm smiling very nicely and asking you if you would give us a little bit of help with the pod. The way you can do that, for example, is writing a review. Each time somebody writes a review, it sort of pushes us up this list of the most popular podcasts. And we don't want to be one of the most popular. We want to be the top podcast in this particular genre. In addition to that, you can also
subscribe, and then you will get our podcast freshly baked in your inbox every 2 weeks.
And please share the good news about this wonderful podcast that you found with all and sundry.
Should we do the quiz answers? Question 1. Star Wars was mainly filmed in Tunisia, but whose home was filmed on the island of Djerba? And the answer is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
That's a terrific question. Great piece of trivia. And question number 2. Chicago is known as the Windy City. But what is the coldest wind chill factor on record? The answer is a staggering -82 Fahrenheit or -63 Celsius, which was recorded on Christmas Eve of 1983.
Did you say -82?
I know, I did.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
All I can say is when we go away next week, I seriously hope that the -19 low is as low as it goes.
Oh, gosh. Let's just stay out of the way of the wind.
Absolutely. And at this stage, we should probably stay out of the way of all of our listeners. If you've stayed with us till now, thank you so very much indeed. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.